everyone. Thank you for tuning into Fireside Streams. I'm Pooja Khandelwal, the Content Strategy Manager at Fashion Stoops, and I'm pleased to be with a very special guest today. He is a senior lecturer in Indigenous Knowledges at Deakin University in Melbourne and the author of an excellent book, Sand Talk. Tyson Yunkaporta. Tyson is a member of the Appalachian clan in Australia, and through his book, he shows us what can be gained by viewing our current global system through the lens of Indigenous knowledge. So today I'm going to be speaking in reference to our Spring-Summer 22 sentiment, Rebirth. And to tell you a little bit about Rebirth, well, Rebirth speaks to finding second chances. And by acknowledging what we have learned in past lives, we try again with a renewed understanding of interconnectedness, clarity of consciousness, and our bond with Mother Earth. We look at the wisdom of Indigenous First Peoples and find blueprints for rebuilding our communities. Tyson and his work personify this sentiment so perfectly, and I'm more than delighted to welcome him to our Fireside Streams. Hi, Tyson. Such an honor to be speaking with you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you so much for your time. So, I was really excited to read your book, Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And just within the first few pages, I knew that this was going to be my next favorite book. You know, it's one of these unusual grappling books that show you a renewed way to look at the world, yourself, and everything in between. Kind of like this wholesome approach towards an awakening. So with that said, what was the inspiration behind writing this book? And for anyone who hasn't read it, could you please describe what Sand Talk means and share a little bit about its contents?
Yeah, well, Sand Talk itself is something that we do in Indigenous Australia. That's always happened. All over the continent, where you draw images in the sand or pretty much on any surface, and they're temporary images that are designed to convey a lot of information in one simple symbol. So you can, transmit a lot of knowledge that would be more than what words could just say. So it's really an ancient form of making meaning, which is something that human beings have been doing for at least 1 million years. So they're the oldest artifacts that have been found on the planet with designs, abstract designs drawn on them are 1 million years old. So we've been doing it for that long. 1 million years is a long time.
Very
so
long.
When I say we, I mean human beings.
Mm-hmm.
It's only very recently, really only the last few centuries, and particularly the last century, where people have been removed from the landscape. Because, even just a century ago, most of the people in the world were still living in a profound relation with the landscape. And it's only been over the last century that, most of those people have been removed from the land. The people remaining, or the people remaining in connection or holding a memory of that, these are what we're now calling Indigenous people. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, that actually brings me to my next question. So, now we understand what we mean by Indigenous people, but what do you mean by Indigenous knowledge? And could you share an example?
So Indigenous knowledge is just any knowledge that's remaining, which is connected to a story and memory of being embedded as an integral part of the landscape. And I think there's a massive longing for that all around the planet, for people who've been removed from that over the last century and are now really struggling, within an economy that's designed to remove people from the landscape and then just plunder the landscape for resources. So, Indigenous knowledge, it's not sort of doesn't have that reductionism that's focusing in on what can be taken, what knowledge can be taken, or what resources can be taken. It's more of a holistic view of the landscape. So it incorporates ideas like time and place. I know that sounds very simple, you know, but most science and most industry ignores time and place. So, I mean, I think a good example of that is fish oil. So in Aboriginal Australia, we understand that fish oil is only medicinal when you see the yellow flowers in the trees. The fish oil is only good medicine in that season. You know, the global marketplace just sort of sees fish oil as fish oil. So they harvest it anytime, any place from any fish, and then they run scientific trials. And some of those trials, they see really good results, but then it's not replicable because the next trial, the fish oil doesn't work. It's because they haven't paid attention to where and when they were harvesting that fish oil. But Indigenous knowledge is basically a way of being in the world that makes sure that time and place are central to things, and that you're always seeing the context, and that you're operating in profound relation with humans and non-humans in the world. Everything is coming from that. And I guess there is a huge longing for a return, for some kind of renaissance, some kind of rebirth where people can connect back to that. And people, particularly at this time in history, are feeling very, you know, there's a big crisis of meaning, and, you know, people don't really know what anything means. They can't make sense of the world. And so they're looking backwards to try and find that. But they don't realize it's not in the past. We've been here all along. We're not pre-modern. We're not post-modern. We're kind of modern adjacent. We've been here all along. You know, so if you look at, so the West, for example, you know, the West took textile manufacturing technology from India. You know, also a lot of agriculture, a lot of seeds, all these kinds of things. But one of the big things they took from India was textile manufacturing techniques, and so that global industry really did come out of India. So, you know, this economic system has been built on plundered knowledge from around the world, you know, including this technology that we're using now. You know, originally binary code was a divination system from an African tribe. That was taken by a Frenchman from there 500 years ago and kind of rediscovered later and applied to computing. So that's
that's amazing. That's extremely insightful. And you know, you mentioned about this longing, and I think right now, because of COVID and lockdown, and I think everyone is able to, in some form, some percentage of it, relate with that feeling of, you know, being closer to nature and the land. And, you know, I guess that there's a big reason of this conversation starting also because of, you know, this pandemic that's happening right now. So my next question is, you know, what really is the first step that we can take as individuals to build, you know, move towards building regenerative, interdependent societies?
Well, I mean, all creativity comes from creation. So you really, you know, all the good ideas come from people who are still in some way in touch with creation. So, you know, strangely enough, the people who are closest to the center of the civilization are the furthest removed from creation, because civilization is like an anti-pattern that's completely the opposite of creation. So you can get no good ideas coming out of a city. All the good ideas in a city come from people going to the outside and mining the margins. So look, originally there was no separation between people and nature. That's a recent thing that's been done by civilization, is this separation of people and nature. But usually you find in your marginal communities, like your refugees, your poor communities, you know, even prisoners, children are another marginalized group in the society. These people are still behaving as human beings, you know, in some way. That they're enjoying the patterns of creation, even though they're struggling and suffering. They are still operating within the patterns of creation in how their society and their relationships operate. So basically, the engine room of creativity for this civilization is marginal groups of people. So this economy and most industries mine the margins. So in the same way that the empire, global Anglo Empire style textiling manufacturing processes from India, we still have that theft going on. So for example, in the fashion industry, a lot of it is taken from African-American males, you know, in their teens through to their mid to late 20s. Pretty much the creative things that those communities do to try and adorn themselves and make themselves distinct, that drives the fashion industry pretty much for the planet. So, you know, most creativity is about the civilization mining the margins. I guess my book is asking civilized people to look within themselves for the fragments, the shattered fragments of the patterns of creation, and see if they can start connecting back up those things and extrapolating those out, you know, to get themselves back in touch with creation again.
Yeah, I think more like, you know, renewing and regenerating on a personal level, like start from there, because I mean, I at least connected with that reading your book. So I think, yeah, it totally fits in so well, so beautifully.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you also talk about how our current thought process sprouts from an ancient seed of narcissism that has been flourishing due to imbalance in our societies. And in the book, you refer to narcissism a couple of times, actually. So my question is, from where did this seed really come? And how did we end up carrying it with us for so long?
Well, it's kind of part of creation, you know, with like, well, as you know, in design, it's usually the thing that breaks the pattern that makes the pattern beautiful. You know, so although like I'm very, you know, angry about narcissism in the book, I think, or I really put it down, it's kind of essential to creation because it's the thing that breaks the pattern. And the pattern needs to be broken from time to time because, you know, a pattern that just keeps replicating itself over and over just stagnates and it's boring and it falls apart. So every now and then you have to have at least one idiot who's stepping up going, I'm the most special person. Everybody should listen to me. I should be the boss. And then everybody needs to struggle over that until the pattern reasserts itself. So you get these blips, you know, throughout the history of creation from the Big Bang onwards. You know, the Big Bang itself was caused by an act of narcissism and two large entities fighting because one of them was was narcissistic. Wow. And you'll find that in most creation stories as well. Many creation stories all over the world. You know, you get most conflict and most suffering and misery comes from the thought of I'm special, I'm fabulous. All things should exist to serve me. I am greater than the land. I'm greater than other people. You know, so it's the cause of all human misery. But it's also, in a way, it's kind of essential. And you have to have times, I guess, where that gets out of control and, you know, to break the pattern and make it reform into something even more intricate, more glorious, and more interesting.
I think that's why you even have a character, you know, specifically for narcissism, like there's Emu. So in the stories, you have like a proper, you know, if there's a script, if there's a play, you have a specific character. And I think it's a revelation to actually know about the Big Bang. That's just so interesting.
Yeah. Well, that was the turtle and the echidna, the porcupine. Fight. Yeah. And so the turtle, you know, that the echidna did smash the turtle right in the middle of its perfect, beautiful shell. And that smash, it cracked out in a pattern. And that formed patterns that went throughout the universe. And I guess you can probably see on this T-shirt here, there are, you know, some interesting geometrical ideas that, you know, an Aboriginal mathematician has started forming, you know, iterations of that pattern.
That's,
you know,
beautiful.
And actually, I even have a tattoo, I think, of a turtle shell there.
That's so
So,
cool. Yeah.
yeah, so the turtle it's a big thing because, you know, that was an act of violence and it did come from an originating act of narcissism, but at the same time, it created the fractal pattern of creation, you
Mm-hmm.
know, which came out in hexagons like you see in a beehive and just
Yeah.
throughout the universe. So design and aesthetics is part of creation, but it kind of comes out of you know, something right and lovely and complete being fractured. So I guess that's
Mm.
a lot of that is the driving force behind why marginal cultures who have been displaced by a civilization seem to be the creative engine room of all that is, you know, exciting and new in the world.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But it's not a very good relationship, you know, and it's a self-terminating program. If you've got powerful people at the center of the civilization who are keeping marginalized peoples oppressed, when it's the marginalized people who have the goods that they need to be able to keep their civilization going, you know,
Yep.
an extractive industry will eventually use up all of those resources if
Mm-hmm.
that method for extraction is destroying that community.
Mm.
But then I
You,
don't know, if we made everybody in the world equal, then who would come up with all the good ideas?
that's so true. Yeah.
If everybody was equal and comfortable and wealthy, then we'd all be sitting on our
We
big
now,
fat butts with our brains not working, and we wouldn't be creating anything.
yep. Yep.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want to work at all. And, it just reminded me of something right now, hearing you speak about these patterns and, how the pattern came, from the Big Bang, the turtle. And I think you even mentioned in the book about the Fibonacci sequence that,
Mhm.
that's how it comes in. I think that's just so beautiful. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Well, that blew my mind. So that was, I guess, the inspiration for writing the book, was that old man who has a lot of these Santalk symbols that have been passed to him by some old women,
Mm-hmm.
you know, decades and decades ago. And so that's his big law story. And he wants everybody to see that. And those symbols are designed to actually change people at the cellular level. It changes the pattern of their existence just to look at it. And I found this has been the experience of a lot of people reading the book, is they've felt changed by it. But it's not the words, it's those images from that old man. So design is so powerful.
Yeah,
So
it is.
powerful, you
Yeah,
know.
definitely a lot of, triggers.
Mm,
And just this whole relationship and, how these different theories are connected is just so phenomenal. I think it's stunning.
so there's this old man out in the bush sitting drawing in the sand and showing me this pattern of how the turtle shell broke out. And he's
Mm-hmm.
going, you know, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8,
Right.
13, 21.
Yep.
Showing me that pattern. And I went, oh my God, that's, you know, so that was supposedly discovered by an Italian mathematician 800 years ago, but it's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
older than that.
Yeah.
um, that was the thing that really grabbed my attention. But also the changes that I felt happen in myself just from
Yeah.
viewing those things. Mm.
Wow. Very nice. So, moving on, it's clear right now we are like deep inside this whole web of impossible messes that we have created.
Yeah.
How do you think we can move towards healthier, more sustainable, and regenerative business models? Because there's always a selfish notion attached with everything that we do. Like, we establish it's like me and I'm special, and that's how it is even with big corporates. I mean, that's how we are wired, at least currently.
Mm.
And even when an establishment tries to go green or find sustainable solutions or better practices, it's not often done for upliftment of nature or humanity. It's
Mm.
usually piggybacked by material gains.
Mm.
There has to be some monetary profits or some cool marketing strategy. So while I understand that we may not be able to eradicate this thought process, completely and all at once, but how do we ease ourselves out of it and
Mm.
move in a direction to change this narrative?
Mm. Well, look, basically in the end, sustainability doesn't scale. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and So that sustainability comes out of diversity, you know. So having a big colonizing central system where everything else is outside of that and revolving around it, it sort of kills the systems of creation. So when I say that sustainability doesn't scale, you know, we've actually evolved over millions of years to be living in quite small community groups. And in small community groups, everybody always knows what everybody's doing. So trust is just an implicit part of that system. And once that community starts growing, once you get someone who's going to be the boss or the chief or the king or the CEO, and they start scaling that, then you lose that trust because you can't keep track of what everybody's doing, you know. So you end up with all your sociopaths emerging and all the rest. And, you know, it ends up being this struggle for survival. It's an unnatural pattern. So really, we need to be living in diversity. It's kind of like a mosaic pattern. So lots and lots of communities that are being shaped by their unique bioregion in their language and culture. And all of those communities need to be interacting. And it's that interaction of diversity that actually creates the most amazing innovations and the most beautiful things. And that's what humans have been doing for most of human history. It's only recently that we've started creating these very big nations. So the idea of a nation, that's only about a century old. They didn't exist before that. You know, these huge countries with millions of people who all speak the same language. That is the death of creativity. That's the death of sustainability, because it's the death of diversity. So really, that's the principle. So in your organizations and everything else, you need to be making sure that you've got smaller, discrete teams, you know, operating together with transparency and trust, and then interacting with many other different teams who are very, very different, very, very diverse. And that's what's going to stimulate your creativity. And then you don't need to be looking outwards to mine the margins of poor and displaced people. And you find your rebirth, you know, from within. You know, if you create that diversity, you foster it, and you allow that to start producing things. And you don't crack down on them with KPIs and deadlines. You allow the things to emerge from that system, and beautiful things will come out. Yeah. A lot of people around the world are experimenting with that, with different corporate models, organizational models. You know, there's a lot of, you know, P2P, you know, peer-to-peer kind of movements coming out, and people are looking at a lot more very interesting, you know, decentralized models of governance, decentralized economies, things like that. People are creating technologies for these things, platforms for these things, and they're quite amazing. So I think, you know, those things will emerge, and they
yeah, that's great.
Out of that will come the next thing, and it will look a lot more like life used to look before. Much more diverse, you know, lots of local communities interacting together in a vast fractal web of creativity. We won't need marginal people anymore. We'll, you know.
Yeah. It's so comforting to actually hear an optimistic, positive view, perspective about what's probably in future and what's coming along. And yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, though, you know, liberalism is a very large force in the world, and particularly the Anglo model of liberalism that, you know, that basically has created the Anglosphere, which is dominating the globe. It does not like to be challenged. And, you know, so it's going to be very difficult. So we've got a lot of decades ahead of us of that sphere tightening around us. And we're going to see a lot of authoritarianism, totalitarianism, control, state and corporate entities merging together, fascist regimes. It's going to be a rough ride. I'm just saying that on the other side of that, the next people who are coming after us, yeah, we want to leave behind for them some good stories, some good tools, and some good ways of thinking, so that they can begin the 1,000-year cleanup that's coming next. So that's where my hope is. It's in the people who are coming next.
Amazing. So my next question to you is a little personal. You know, on one hand, you've had the experience of living in Cape York in far north Queensland with your tribe, where the population is hardly 7,500. And on the other, you've lived in a city like Melbourne with 5 million people as its population. So how has the transition been for you?
It's been a nightmare. Yeah, I haven't coped very well with it. Well, I mean, you see what I look like. I used to be quite a handsome fella, but yeah, no, it's made me quite sick. It's very difficult to be so separated from land and from people and community, and to find yourself paradoxically, you know, surrounded by more people, but more isolated than you've ever been. You know, cities are characterized by isolation. We're all encouraged to be these individual operators. We're expected to behave in this economy like miniature corporations unto ourselves, and we're supposed to use whatever capital, resources, relationships, skills we have. We're supposed to use that to sort of leverage sort of futures trading and speculation on our own, capabilities down the track. And we roll the dice and we hope we come out on top. And I guess everybody hopes that they'll become that fabulous, awesome, you know, rich person who's sitting on the top of everyone else. Because really, that's the only place where you can enjoy the benefits of what the land used to give to all people for free.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if only we could all just go back to living off of land. I mean, I don't think that's ever happening. It's going to be like, you know, two of these systems coming together and making something beautiful out of it. But yeah. So, you know, aside from being an author and a senior lecturer, you also create traditional tools and weapons. So what does creating these items with your own hands mean to you? And how do you relate it with consciousness?
Yeah, well, that's about your cognition. So there's a lot of scientific studies been done on things that they're calling distributed cognition or haptic cognition, embodiment, all these kinds of things. And so basically you've got neural processes that don't just occur inside your brain. They occur in the landscape around you, in your relationships with all the people that you encounter and the non-human beings that you encounter, and the sentient landscape itself. Right. Hey. This is my little bubby. Hey.
Hi. Hey there. How are you doing?
There. Now off you go. Sorry. Yeah. So we got that. Yeah. So when you're creating tools, you're creating things with your hands. It's an extension of your neural processes, and it's something that's quite unique to us as human beings. I think they're. Sorry. So the cognitive scientists have only found this in about 3 different species so far. Some primates, and I think otters and human beings, where a tool becomes an extension, becomes recognized in your mind as an extension of your body, and not just that tool, but then, you know, all the connections and the spaces in between, the relationships that you have with everything around you. So for me, you know, carving is a way of getting in touch with that sort of super consciousness and that super sort of cognitive power, because your brain can only do so much, but your mind is so much more than your brain, and it extends out into everything around you, into everything that you can meet and know and come into relationship with. So for me, my carving practice is a way of accessing that. and it it enables me to access a lot more information than I can do on a computer or anything else. So that's what enabled me to be able to write this book in 2 weeks. It only took 2 weeks to write it.
Wow.
It's not because I'm smart or I have a good brain. My brain is useless. It's like one of the worst brains I've ever met, but I don't really need it because I have something, a larger consciousness to tap into, and you can perform very vast feats of creativity in a very short time. Accessing that.
Well, first of all, the fact that you completed it in 2 weeks, it just blows my mind. That's awesome. And second, in our current world of hyperconnectedness and networking, you give a new definition to being connected, at the core of it, what it actually means. And I think that's just so amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, any connections that we make online, they can only ever be weak connections. There are stronger connections to be made.
So that brings us to my last question for you. Are you working on another book? And could you tell us about it if you are? Like, what's next?
What's next is my contract tells me that by the end of this month, where are we now, the 18th? Okay, I'm supposed to have the next book done by the end of September.
Wow.
And so, I don't know, what have I got? Nearly 2 weeks to write that. Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I haven't started that yet. But...
Well, you have 2 weeks, so I guess we're good.
Yeah, I'm still not 100% certain about that, but I'm supposed to be co-authoring it with old man Juma from the book, and so I don't know. I might have to get an extension on that one. I'm sure I could write it in time if I was able to just walk away from this computer now and start doing it. But yeah, time doesn't really permit that at the moment. And I'm on lockdown in Melbourne, locked in the house with 2 of us working full time from home with 2 babies. And that doesn't really foster the conditions for any kind of creative emergence to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wish you all the best, and I'm really looking forward to this second book of yours. And I want to just take a moment to tell you that your wisdom is breathtaking, and the way you narrate a story is just simply so wonderful. The entire FS team has been so inspired by you and your book, and I really want to thank you on behalf of my team. It has really been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for talking. All right. See ya.